The first time I realized I was in love with King Jaden, I nearly dropped my sword. But it wasn't because the realization arrived dramatically, and definitely not because some divine messenger appeared from the heavens. The truth arrived while I was watching him argue with Lord Varric over grain taxes, which was perhaps the least romantic moment imaginable. Yet somehow it happened anyway. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. Unfortunately, that realization came later. At the moment, I was standing inside the king's private study, staring at a piece of parchment that threatened to unravel the kingdom. Jaden stood beside me. The evidence Lord Renwick had provided rested between us. A single seal stamped into red wax. It was simple, unassuming, and terrifying because I recognized it. Everyone did. The seal belonged to Lord Oral. For several moments, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched heavily through the room. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. Inside, the kingdom shifted beneath our feet. It could be forged. Jaden finally broke the silence. The words sounded almost hopeful. I understood why. Lord Oral had served 3 generations of kings. He had advised Jaden's grandfather, his father, and now him. The man was practically part of the palace itself. Accusing him felt like accusing the foundation stones. It was difficult to imagine. I studied the document again. The handwriting, the code, the seal. Nothing felt accidental. Nothing felt false. I don't think it is. The king closed his eyes just briefly, a flash of exhaustion crossing his face. Then it disappeared, hidden behind the mask rulers learned to wear. Neither do I. The admission sounded painful, more painful than any wound. Because betrayal always hurt most when it came from people you trusted. Jaden moved toward the window. Rainwater streaked the glass. Dark clouds covered the sky. The entire city seemed wrapped in gray. Find the truth. His voice was quiet, steady, determined. Whatever it costs. I nodded immediately. There had never been another answer. I will. The king looked back at me. For a brief moment, the weight vanished from his face. And there he was, the man beneath the crown, the man I had traveled north with, the man who laughed around campfires, the man who remembered villagers' names, the man who somehow occupied entirely too much space in my thoughts. The realization made my chest tighten, an increasingly common problem. Investigating Lord Oral felt wrong. Not dangerous, but wrong. Like digging up a respected ancestor to check if he had stolen something. The man was woven into every corner of the kingdom. Everyone trusted him, including me, at least I had. Now I wasn't certain of anything. 3 days passed, then 4, then 6. I watched, waited, followed, observed, and slowly, the cracks began to appear. Small at first, almost invisible, the kind most people would overlook, like the meetings at unusual hours. Conversations that ended abruptly when others approached. Messages delivered through servants who normally worked in entirely different wings of the palace. Nothing conclusive, yet together they formed a pattern, a very troubling one. I stood in a shadowed corridor one evening watching Oral disappear through a side entrance. The passage led toward old storage chambers rarely used anymore. Why would the chief counselor be there alone at midnight? My instincts screamed, so I followed. Years of training made the task simple. The old corridor twisted through forgotten sections of the palace. Dust coated the walls. Cobwebs filled corners. No counselor should have any reason to be here. Yet Oral walked confidently, as though he knew the route well. Eventually, he reached an abandoned records room. The door opened, then closed. I waited, counted slowly, then approached. The room beyond stood empty. No counselor, no documents. A curse escaped before I could stop it. There was definitely a hidden passage. I spent nearly an hour searching before finding it. A concealed door hidden behind ancient shelves. Someone had been planning this for years. The discovery should have occupied my thoughts. Instead, my mind kept wandering elsewhere, towards someone else, which was becoming a serious problem. I first noticed it during a council meeting. Jaden sat at the head of the table, listening to nobles argue, far more patiently than they deserved. I should have been focused on security, on threats, on suspects. Instead, I found myself watching him. The way he leaned forward when concentrating. The way frustration appeared briefly before he hid it. The way he thanked servants. The way he listened. Gods, I needed help. Serious help. The realization only grew worse over the following days. I noticed everything. When he skipped breakfast. When he looked tired. when he was pretending not to be tired, when he smiled, when he laughed, when something upset him, when something pleased him. The observations came automatically, as though my mind had quietly decided the king was the most important person in any room. That was a dangerous conclusion, one I should have corrected. Instead, I found myself making it repeatedly. The moment everything finally made sense happened in the training yard, a place I usually considered safe, not a location for life-changing realizations. Jaden had arrived unexpectedly, apparently escaping another council meeting. The king leaned against a wooden fence while several knights practiced nearby. For once he looked relaxed. The sight hit unexpectedly hard, and suddenly memories began connecting. The northern journey, the campfires, the constant thoughts, the relief whenever he was safe, the anger whenever someone threatened him, the way my attention searched for him automatically, the way every room seemed brighter when he entered, the way every day seemed better when he smiled. One by one the pieces clicked together, a puzzle I somehow hadn't solved until now. My sword slipped from my hand, clattered loudly against the ground. Several knights turned. I ignored them, because suddenly nothing else mattered. Only the truth, only the realization crashing through me. I was in love with him. Not admiration, not loyalty, not friendship, but actual love for the king. My king, the man I had sworn to protect, the man I could never have. For a moment I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't move. The truth struck harder than any blade, because once it existed, everything changed. Every memory, every conversation, every feeling reinterpreted instantly. And the worst part? The absolutely worst part? I wasn't even surprised. Deep down, some part of me had known for weeks, perhaps months. I had simply been too stubborn to acknowledge it. Kelo, Jaden's voice came concerned. I looked up. The king had crossed the yard. His eyes searched mine, as though my well-being mattered, as though I mattered. Are you all right? No, not remotely. I was catastrophically unwell. I dropped my sword. I said. It was a brilliant response, truly exceptional. Jaden stared, then laughed. The sound nearly finished me off. God's help me. I was doomed, completely doomed, because I had finally learned the truth. And the truth was simple. I loved King Jaden, with every stubborn, foolish part of my heart, and I had absolutely no idea what to do about it. For 3 days, I avoided being alone with Jaden, which would have been easier if he wasn't the king. Unfortunately, kings had an irritating tendency to appear everywhere. Council meetings, training grounds, military briefings, royal inspections. Everywhere I turned, there he was. And now that I knew the truth, every interaction felt different. Because before, I had been confused. Now I understood exactly what was happening. I was in love with him. The realization should have brought clarity. Instead, it brought misery. Because every smile hurt. Every laugh hurt. Every moment beside him hurt. Not because I disliked them. Because I wanted more. And wanting more was the problem. Kings belong to kingdoms, not knights. No matter how foolish the knight happened to be. Unfortunately, understanding that fact did absolutely nothing to change how I felt. 3 days after my realization, I found myself standing outside the royal study. I had spent the entire afternoon debating whether I should enter. It was an embarrassing amount of time for a man trained to charge into battle. Yet here I was, terrified of a conversation. The door opened unexpectedly. I nearly reached for my sword, but Jaden stepped into the corridor, then immediately stopped. Surprised. Kelo, wonderful. Exactly the person I was trying to avoid. The king studied me carefully. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then a small smile appeared. I was about to send for you. Of course he was. Because apparently the universe enjoyed making my life difficult. You needed something, Your Majesty? The smile softened. Gods, that smile. I wanted your opinion. My heart betrayed me immediately, as always. On what? Jaden hesitated, then opened the study door wider. Come inside. A terrible idea. The worst possible idea. But naturally, I followed him. The study felt unusually quiet. Several maps covered the table. Documents lay scattered nearby. Evidence from the investigation. The conspiracy. Lord Oral. The kingdom's slow collapse. The reminders helped. At least they gave me something else to think about. Jaden moved around the desk, then paused. His expression changed, growing more serious. We have a problem. I almost laughed. Only one. The king handed me several reports. I read quickly and immediately understood. More guards had disappeared. Supply records had been altered. Messages had gone missing. The palace was infected, not by rebels, by traitors, people we trusted, people inside our walls. My jaw tightened. They're preparing something. I know. Jaden sounded exhausted. For a moment, he looked very young. Not like a king, not like a ruler, just a man carrying too much weight. The sight did something painful to my chest, something familiar, something I was increasingly tired of pretending not to understand. Silence settled between us, comfortable but dangerous, the kind of silence we had developed over months together, neither rushing to fill it, neither needing to. Jaden eventually looked up, our eyes met, and suddenly everything I had planned to say seemed possible. Maybe because we were alone, maybe because I was tired of hiding, maybe because the kingdom might collapse tomorrow. Whatever the reason, something inside me shifted. Your Majesty. His expression changed immediately. Concern, curiosity, something else, something I couldn't identify. Yes. My pulse hammered, louder than battle, louder than war drums, louder than reason. There is something I need to tell you. The room went still, completely still. Jaden froze. The reaction surprised me. Why did he suddenly look nervous? The king swallowed. For a brief moment, hope flashed across his face. That was a strange expression. My heart stumbled, but I forced myself forward. One step, then another. The words sat on the edge of my tongue. But at that moment, the palace exploded. A deafening crash shook the room. The floor trembled beneath our feet. Glass shattered somewhere nearby. For a split second, neither of us moved. Neither of us understood. Then screams erupted outside. Chaos followed immediately. The sound of steel, shouting, running footsteps, alarm bells. Every instinct I possessed ignited. The coup. The realization hit instantly. It was too organized, too coordinated, too sudden. This wasn't an attack. It was a takeover. Stay behind me. The order left my mouth automatically. Jaden almost rolled his eyes. Even now, even during a disaster, the man remained impossible. Kelo. Another explosion interrupted him. It was closer this time. Smoke drifted past the study windows. The palace corridor erupted with shouting. Someone screamed. A second voice answered. Then steel clashed. I drew my sword immediately. The familiar weight settled into my hand. The study doors burst open. A guard stumbled inside. Blood covered his uniform. His face had gone pale. Your Majesty. He nearly fell. Traitors. The word struck like lightning. We have traitors among the royal guard. Jaden's expression hardened. There was no surprise, only cold anger. The most dangerous kind. How many? The guard shook his head. Too many. My stomach dropped, because I already knew what that meant. Lord Oral, the investigation, the hidden passages, the missing reports. We had been right. Every suspicion, every fear, every warning. And now it was too late. The palace descended into war. Not battle. War. Corridors became killing grounds. Grand halls became fortresses. Servants fled in terror. Nobles barricaded themselves inside rooms. Smoke filled the air. The rebels had somehow breached the inner palace. This was impossible unless someone had opened the gates, unless someone inside had helped them. It had to be Oral. The realization filled me with fury. Months, perhaps years. The man had planned this, patiently and carefully waiting. And now the kingdom was paying the price. Kelo. Jaden pointed down a side corridor. More attackers. 6, maybe 7. And they were moving fast toward us. I reacted immediately. Steel met steel. The first rebel fell quickly. The second lasted longer. The third nearly reached the king. My sword found its target. Blood splashed stone. The corridor echoed with violence. Everything blurred. My only instinct was to protect the king. To protect Jaden. The thought repeated endlessly. The only thing that mattered. Then someone shouted. Retreat. A loyal guard. One of ours. The eastern wing has fallen. My blood turned cold. Fallen? An entire palace wing? The scale of the attack finally became clear. This wasn't rebellion. This was conquest. Someone intended to seize the throne tonight. The separation happened quickly. One moment Jaden stood beside me. The next the world exploded into chaos. A section of the ceiling collapsed. Stone crashed downward. People screamed. Dust filled the air. Visibility vanished instantly. I heard Jaden shout my name. Then nothing. The corridor disappeared beneath debris. Guards scattered. Rebels charged. The palace became a nightmare. Jaden. I never used his name. Not aloud. Not without permission. Not ever. Yet the shout tore from me anyway. Desperate, terrified, I cut through the dust, through smoke, through panicked crowds, searching, but I couldn't find him. Hours seemed to pass, perhaps minutes. Time had ceased to matter. Every corridor looked the same, every battle blurred together, but Jaden remained missing. By midnight, the palace no longer resembled home. Fires burned throughout several wings. Bodies littered the halls. Broken banners hung from shattered walls. The rebels controlled entire sections of the complex. The kingdom itself felt wounded. But I kept searching for the king. Eventually, I reached the royal chambers, the king's chambers. The last place I hadn't checked. Hope stirred painfully inside me. Maybe he escaped here. Maybe he was safe. But the door stood open. My heart stopped. The room beyond had been destroyed. Furniture overturned. Glass shattered. Blood stained the floor. Signs of battle everywhere. Yet no bodies. No king. No guards. Nothing. The silence felt unbearable. I stepped forward slowly, disbelief settling into every part of me. This couldn't be happening. Not him. Not Jaden. Not after everything. I searched the room anyway. Desperately. Pointlessly. But finding nothing. Only emptiness. Only absence. Only failure. The truth settled heavily into my chest. I had sworn an oath to protect the king, to defend him, to stand between him and every threat. Yet when he needed me most, I wasn't there. I sank heavily into a chair overturned by the fighting. The exhaustion finally caught me. For the first time in years, I felt helpless. Not because enemies surrounded me, not because the palace was falling, because I didn't know where he was. And for the first time since becoming his knight, I couldn't protect him. The realization hurt more than any wound I had ever suffered. Because somewhere inside the chaos of a dying palace, King Jaden was alone, and I had failed the person I loved.